Hello, it's Mrs. Fawcett and Lulu, and we're back to read some more of The Wild Robot Escapes. Chapter 48, The Return. The robot's feelings of worry and confusion and guilt went away as soon as she heard her son's voice echoing through the farm. "Ma, we're back!" Bright Bill's flock appeared above the pasture, flapping and honking and laughing. They glided down to Roz. Bright Bill took his place on his mother's shoulder. "I told you we'd keep your son out of trouble," squawked Loudwing. "Thank you, everyone." The robot spoke in her most cheerful voice. "It is so good to see all of you again." The cows trotted over, grinning and happily mooing to the geese. While the herd and the flock caught up with each other, Roz and Bright Bill slipped away to speak privately. "What's the plan, Ma?" said Bright Bill. "The plan is simple," said Roz. "Tonight, after the cover of darkness, we will run away from the farm, and then you and I will begin our journey home." The evening was full of sad goodbyes. The first goodbye was between the flock and their young leader. The other geese wanted to help Bright Bill and Roz get home, but the journey would be dangerous, and Bright Bill refused to put his flock at risk. He demanded they return to the island without him. The geese could feel their instincts urging them onward, and they knew Roz and Bright Bill would look after each other. So they said their goodbyes and took off into the night sky. The next goodbye was between the robot and the cows. Roz marched into the pasture one last time as the herd gathered around. "I guess this is it," said the robot. "Thank you for being so kind to me." Annabelle sniffed and said, "I really hate goodbyes, but I'm glad you're going home where you belong. I just wish there was some way I could be helpful." "Actually, there is something you could do." Roz unsnapped a pocket of her tool belt and took out the transmitter. "You could hold on to this for me. Hopefully it will take a few days for Mr. Sharif to realize I'm gone." Annabelle smiled as the robot gently tucked the small device under her collar. Lily and the other calves suddenly swarmed around Roz and nuzzled her legs. They all had tears in their eyes. Tess wanted to lighten the mood, but she couldn't think of anything funny to say. The other cows called out to their friend, "We'll miss you, Roz. Get home safely. Don't forget about us." Roz waved to the herd. She said a silent goodbye to all the farm machines, parked in the shed. Then she followed the driveway out to the fields, and Bright Bill on her shoulder, and the children at her side. The last goodbye was the hardest of all. Everyone was quiet as they walked through the silvery moonlight, past rows and rows of sprouted crops, and out to the farthest corner of the farthest field. Roz turned and faced Jaya and Jad. She looked past them, back to the distant lights of the farm building. "I've prepared the farm for my departure," said Roz. "It will take care of itself for a while, but not forever." "We can manage things, at least until we get another robot," said Jad. "This place won't be the same without you, but we'll be okay." "What will you tell your father?" said Roz. "That's for us to worry about," said Jaya. "You just worry about getting home." Roz glanced down at the tool belt strapped across her chest. "Would you like this back?" "It was a gift," said Jaya. "No, we would not," said Jad. The girl pulled her brother and her robot into a big, tight hug. Beneath the sounds of the crickets were the sounds of the children crying. "How will we know when you've made it safely home?" said Jad. "We need to know how your story ends," said Jaya. The robot muttered some animal words to her son and then said to the children, "If a goose ever visits this farm and presents you with a feather, you will know that I made it home." The children smiled through their tears and waited for their friend to leave. But the robot didn't move. More than anything, Roz wanted to go home, and yet she was conflicted. She cared about this family and this farm, and now she was abandoning them. The robot lurched forward and then backward, again and again, as her computer brain struggled with all of these thoughts and feelings. Finally, the children gave her a gentle push. "Roz, we order you to run away." And the robot did as she was told. Chapter 50, The Free Robot. At long last, Roz was free, but as she ran away from Hilltop Farm, she didn't feel free. She felt something more like fear. She feared being seen and captured and destroyed. She feared for her son's safety. So Roz camouflaged herself. She avoided the fields and kept to the trees. And with Bright Bill as her guide, she carefully crept north through farm country. The wild robot's long journey home had begun. Chapter 51, The Airship. The sun was up and our friends were on the move. They were traveling quickly and quietly along a narrow strip of forest and cut between a vast crop of fields. If not for that nagging fear of being spotted, it would have been a very pleasant hike. Wind whisked through the leaves. Insects hummed and chirped. Farm machines rambled in the distance. And then there came a new sound, a buzzing sound. Our friends hid in the underbrush as an airship rose up from the horizon ahead of them. It was a sleek white triangle flying low and fast. Roz adjusted her vision and saw familiar robots gazing out of the front window. Rico 1, Rico 2, Rico 3 had been destroyed back on the island. Perhaps these robots were Rico 4, 5, and 6? "They're flying toward Hilltop Farm," said Bright Bill. "We need to keep moving," said Roz. The airship disappeared to the south, and the travelers continued north at a faster pace. They hurried through more strips of forest, past squirrels and birds and groundhogs and other friendly creatures, but the robot and the goose had no time to chat. Later that day, the trees came to an abrupt end. Roz and Bright Bill stood at the forest edge and faced an ocean of wheat. The wheat was still young. And green. It gently waved in the wind and spread out as far as they could see. "What should we do?" said Bright Bill. "We need to keep moving," said Roz, staring across the plains. "But I'm not safe in the open. There must be more trees somewhere." "I'll take a look," said Bright Bill, and the goose launched himself upward. Up, up, up he went, high into the air, until he finally stopped and floated, just a tiny winged shape against the blue. and then he dove back to his mother. "There are trees in that other direction," said Bright Bill, pointing. "It's far, about 30 minutes at top speed." "Then we'd better get started," said Roz. Our friends burst out from the underbrush, the robot sprinting through the field, the goose flying by her side. Roz had to concentrate to keep from slipping in the soft, muddy soil. But she stomped on, and far ahead, another line of trees slowly climbed into view. Bright Bill suddenly swooped up and out of sight as his mother kept on running. Then he lowered back down beside her and squawked, "The airship is returning!" Behind them, a tiny white triangle rose up from the horizon. It was growing larger and louder by the second. If Roz was seen, her newfound freedom and her life would be over. She couldn't take any chances. Go on without me," hollered the robot, and she dropped to the ground. Bright Bill hoped his mother knew what she was doing, and he flew on without her. Once he reached the trees, he perched himself on a branch and looked back. His mother had vanished. The airship, however, seemed to fill the sky. Its shadow flitted across the ground where Roz had just been, but the ship didn't see her, and it detected no electronic signal, so it kept going, racing above the trees and over the next field. Its engine noise gradually faded, and it disappeared to the north. "You can come out, Ma," squawked Bright Bill from his branch. A column of wheat stood up in the field. The robot had rushed her camouflage, and it crumbled off her body as she started to march. As she approached the trees, Roz looked at Bright Bill in the branches and said, "We need to keep moving." Lulu, are you sleeping? Chapter 52, The Scout. Would the airship return? Were the Ricos hunting for Roz? Was it only a matter of time before she was caught? It was impossible to know. So our friends tried not to worry about all those troubling questions, and they continued sneaking through farm country, from one wooden area to the next. Roz wore a disguise of mud and weeds and bark. At the first hint of trouble, she would freeze and instantly become a rotten old tree trunk. Then she'd wait for Bright Bill to tell her when it was safe to move on. If there were humans or robots nearby, she might have to wait for hours. Back on the island, Bright Bill had practiced flying like hawks and owls and sparrows and vultures. He couldn't fly exactly like those other birds, of course, but he was an expert at diving and swooping and darting and soaring. Now he used those skills to secretly scout out the countryside for his mother. He'd fly up from her shoulder and return a short time later to share his findings. "We're coming toward another farmhouse. Let's avoid it by cutting through this field. Beyond these trees to the highway. Stay away, and I'll tell you when it's safe to cross. Straight ahead is a small town, but I can lead you around it." Bright Bill's advice was always good, and Roz always followed it. And together the travelers safely made their way through farm country. Chapter 53, The Farm Country. During their travels, our friends passed every kind of farm imaginable. Some farms grew crops in vast fields and orchards. Others grew crops in great glimmering greenhouses. Some farms let their animals graze through open pastures. Others kept their animals confined to small enclosures. Some farms had old-fashioned barns and sheds. Others had modern laboratories that made meat, eggs, and milk without any animals at all. These seemed to be an infinite number of ways to produce food for humans. The farms were teeming with robot workers, and Roz couldn't resist spying on them as she carefully slunk past. The robots worked the fields and machines and livestock, their bodies shining in the sun, shimmering in the heat. This must have been how Roz looked back on Hilltop Farm. Were any of these robots like her? Were any of them quietly dreaming of escape? Or were they all just mindless machines, content with their place in the world? Chapter 54, The Mountains. The flat plains of farm country gradually rolled into hills and valleys. There were fewer crop fields and more forests. The hills grew taller, the valleys sunk deeper, and the farms disappeared entirely. Our friends had reached the mountains. Brightbill floated on the wind as Roz climbed the slopes. They passed craggy rock formations and rushing waterfalls and meadows and lush flowers. The robot could have hiked on, never slowing or stopping, but the goose needed rest. As the stars came out each evening, they found a safe location to settle down. Frost was common in the high regions, and Roz took the lighter from her tool belt and built small campfires to keep her son warm. They sat around the crackling flames, reminiscent of life on the island, until Brightbill drifted off to sleep. As the sun came up each morning, they'd clear away all traces of their campfire and set off again, deeper into the mountains. Eagles perched on jagged cliffs. Fish splashed through gurgling streams. Chipmunks bickered in the thick undergrowth. It felt good to be back in the wilderness, but this place wasn't home, so the travelers kept a brisk pace. The robot adjusted her camouflage to match her surroundings. In the forest, she wore leaves and tree bark. In the meadows, she wore grass and wildflowers. In the rocky terrain, she wore dirt and weeds. Even way out there in the wilderness, she wanted to be unseen. What Roz didn't realize was that she was already being watched. Chapter 55, The Attack. Wide mountain meadows made the robot nervous. While hiking through them, she felt exposed and easy to spot. Camouflage helped, but it was hard not to notice a walking clump of wildflowers, especially one accompanied by a goose. And it was in one of those wide meadows that trouble caught up with her friends. From the corner of her eye, Roz sensed movement. She turned but only saw tall grass blowing in the breeze. Then a twig snapped, but the sound was swallowed up by a distant roll of thunder. It wasn't until the wind changed and the musky scent wafered by that the robot understood the danger. "I smell wolves," whispered Roz. Brightbill's eyes grew wide and round, and he whispered back, "What should we do?" Before Roz could reply, 2 wolves leaped out from the brush. They charged toward the robot, snarling and snapping their jaws. Roz heaved her son toward the sky so that he could fly to safety, and then she burst into a sprint. The robot zigged and zagged across the meadow, trying to shake off the wolves. But When she dashed through a patch of soft ground, she slipped and toppled into the grass. The wolves quickly surrounded their prey, heads low, ears drawn back. Deep growls rumbled through their teeth. "Remember us, Roz?" said the huge male with the scar. "Hello again, Shadow," said the robot, slowly getting to her feet. "And I believe your name is Barb." "You've a good memory," said the female wolf. "I actually have a perfect memory," said the robot. "And yet you've forgotten your rifle." The toothy smile appeared on Shadow's face. "You aren't so tough without your rifle, are you?" Barb sniffed the breeze. "Where's your pet goose?" And then she saw Brightbill perched on a lone tree in the middle of the meadow. "He's not my pet," said Roz. "He's my son." Shadow chuckled. "We've heard stories about the robot mother and her son, the goose. They're very touching." He turned and barked, "Join us, Brightbill. We'd love to meet you up close." "Stay where you are, son," hollered Roz. "I will take care of them." "You'll take care of us?" growled Shadow. "No, Barb and I will take care of you." The robot's computer brain hummed as it tried to make a plan. The wolves were stalking toward her. Any second now they would attack, and Roz had to do something, anything, so she stalled. "Shadow, Barb, is it just the two of you?" Roz scanned the meadow and saw no other wolves. "Where is the rest of your pack?" Well, that was the wrong question to ask, because the fur on Shadow's back stood up as he snarled, "This is my pack now." Then the wolves pounced, but Roz wasn't there. With all the strength in her legs, the robot launched herself up and away, and now she was soaring through the air in a long, graceful arc. Once her feet stomped back to the ground, she launched herself up again. With giant, arching strides, the robot bounded across the meadow in the direction of her son. At first, the wolves were baffled by the robot's strange escape, but they were expert hunters. They raced after her, studying her closely, watching where she landed, and then Roz made her final leap toward Brightbill's tree. A heavy paw knocked her off balance, and she tumbled through the air and slammed against the trunk. Leaves shook loose, dead branches crashed down, but the robot held tight to the tree. "Are you okay, Ma?" said the goose as he fluttered to his mother's side. "Just some light scrapes," said the robot, and she pulled herself up to a sturdy branch. Below the trees, the wolves were howling with laughter. "Nice try, Roz," said Shadow, "but you can't outrun us. Wolves are built for chasing." "You are wasting your time," said the robot. "You cannot eat me, and you will never catch my son." "You still don't get it, Roz," growled the wolf. I'm not hunting you for food. I'm hunting you for revenge." Chapter 56, The Torch. Our friends were stuck in that tree. They sat in the upper branches high above the wolves, trying to calculate an escape. Brightbill could fly off whenever he liked, but Roz had to come down eventually. And when she did, the wolves would be ready. Shadow and Barb stretched out in the shade. They glanced around and licked their fur and sniffed the mountain air. The wolves looked comfortable, and yet there was tension between them. "I'm hungry," growled Barb. "I want to eat rabbits and deer, or maybe go back to farm country and prey on livestock. Anything is better than hunting a creature that we can't eat." You can eat all the animals you like, said Shadow, after we kill the robot. Barb grumbled with frustration. She didn't understand Shadow's need for revenge. But for now, she stayed loyal to her mate. Day turned to night, and the wolves started yawning. Barb's eyelids became heavy. Shadow's body became weary. Then the soothing song of the crickets lulled them both to sleep. The sight of sleeping wolves reminded Roz of those long winter nights on the island when wild animals crawled into her warm home and slept. She remembered the frightening look in their eyes when they saw fire for the first time, and this gave Roz an idea. Quietly, she broke off a dead branch from the tree trunk. Then she took the lighter from her tool belt and held a flame under the branch's knobby end until it was blazing, and then she dropped down to the ground. Shadow and Barb snapped awake to find the world bathed in orange light. Towering above them, looking like a demon, was the robot. Her eyes were glowing, her mouth was roaring, and her hand was a torch. Flames rippling, embers whirling into the air. The wolves had never seen fire. It was beautiful and it was terrible. Deep inside, they felt their wolf instincts telling them this ball of swirling light was dangerous. Their instincts told them to run for their lives, and when Roz lunged toward them, they ran. Barb yelped, Shadow whimpered, and the two wolves raced away from the fire just as fast as they could. Chapter 56, The Stones. At first light, Roz nudged Brightbill awake, and the travelers continued north through the mountains. The goose stood on his mother's shoulder while she marched. His eyes darted around nervously, searching for any sign of the wolves, but the wolves were gone. As our friends turned their attention to a new problem. The weather out there was always changing. Roz and Brightbill had seen many calm, sunny days, suddenly turn to wind or fog or sleet or even snow. Our friends expected bad weather, so they hardly even noticed when heavy rains came sweeping down the valley. But there was something odd about this rain. Brightbill squinted at the oncoming storm and said, "Ma, why is the rain bouncing off the ground?" Bouncing rain? That didn't seem right. The robot's computer brain went to work, and then she found the correct word. It's not rain, it's hail. Clang! A hailstone bounced off Roz's chest. Another one swished into the weeds. Then the sky opened up with hailstones everywhere. They tore through the leaves and branches. They ricocheted off rocks and roots. They flattened flowers and bushes. To the robot, the hailstones were annoying. To the goose, they were deadly. A stone hit Brightbill's shoulder and he fell to the ground. Roz scooped him up, hunched over, and protected him from the falling stones. But the hailstorm might kill the poor bird if they couldn't find cover soon. Frantically, the robot scanned the area for any type of shelter. And there it was. On the far side of the valley, beside a winding river, was a cabin. It was old and shabby, but it had a roof. And that's what our friends needed the most. Roz held her son close, pumped her legs, and thundered across the valley. Heavy hailstones hissed into the grass and squelched into the mud and clanged off our robot. There was a soft thump, and Brightbill cried out in pain. Roz bounded over over the rushing river in a single leap, landing without breaking stride, and kept running. Now she could hear hailstones cracking against the cabin, louder and louder. The robot stomped up to the front door, turned the handle, and stepped inside. Next time, we'll read more about the cabin.